Hello and welcome to Maximum Lennon, the first talking book about John Lennon. It was written and researched by Alan Clayson, music is by Amanda Thompson and Keith Rodway, and it's read by Robert Rayner. You can check out our full catalogue on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk, where you can also join our Maximum Collectors Club to receive special offers and free CDs. Alternatively, join the Maximum Collectors Club by filling in the registration form attached to the booklet inside this CD and post it back to us.
No violence, no starving children, no violent minds, no violent households, no frustration, no fear.
Both a figurehead and grey eminence of pop, John Lennon's influence as a vocalist and composer has been acknowledged by every such artist that has mattered, and his lyrics quoted like proverbs. During the 4-year sabbatical before the brief re-emergence that climaxed in his sudden death in 1980, he became as unreachable an object of myth as Elvis Presley. Though incommunicado when resident in New York's smart Dakota building, there wasn't a newspaper editor in the world who wouldn't promise a fortune for a Lennon exclusive or an up-to-the-minute photo. Rock stars passing through the Big Apple made at least token efforts to gain an audience with the grand old man, despite his many dubious public antics in the past and hearsay about strange goings-on in the Dakota. Having gouged so deep a wound in pop, the repercussions of the Beatles resounded still as their founder member continued an albeit sporadic recording career, yet undoubtedly one containing odd sparks of the old fire that used to power him when the Beatles were stuck on the Liverpool-Hamburg treadmill. Then there'd been so many ideas, and not only musical ones, chasing through his mind that it was all he could do to note them down. Flames of inspiration would kindle during a 20-minute stroll to Hamburg's main railway station to buy yesterday's Daily Express. Others jerked him from a velvet blue oblivion back in the dungeons where the Beatles slept during their maiden visit in 1960. Even after the group made it, tomorrow would seem a year away, as together with Paul McCartney, John would figure out a chord sequence to fragments of melody or rhymes, forming a couplet. From a mere title, the ghost of a sketchy chorus would smoulder into form, followed by a red-eyed objectivity and a private quality control that would engross him and Paul until day became night, with the two surrounded by cigarette butts, smeared coffee cups, and pages full of scribbled verse and notation peculiar to themselves. As he never learned to sight read or write musical script, John was untroubled by the formal do's and don'ts that traditionally affect creative flow. There were only the stylistic clichés and habits ingrained since his teenage self had positioned yet uncalloused fingertips on the taut strings of his first guitar. "I only learned to play to back myself," he'd say later. When grappling with his muse, he drew from virtually every musical and literary idiom he had ever encountered and realized some extraordinary visions in the process. Yet John Lennon hadn't had all that much going for him when he trod the boards as an amateur with the Quarrymen in 1957. While he could just about find his way around his instrument, he aroused little enthusiasm, either for his singing or his first attempts at songwriting. On the surface, he didn't show brilliance at any one aspect of his craft back then. But within him, as the world was to discover, he had a powerful yet intangible creative thrust.
I know I met Paul first, and he sort of joined this sort of group I had, and then George, gradually changed till it was just us three.
On the 9th of October 1940, John Winston Lennon was born at Liverpool's Oxford Street Maternity Hospital. The radio weatherman had forecast a dull but mild night, which it was, apart from the wailing sirens and flares illuminating the sky as the Luftwaffe dropped ton upon booming ton of death and destruction in and around the slip-slapping wharfs of Dockland, where the murky Mersey sweeps into the Irish Sea. The following morning, brick dust crunched beneath the hooves of dray horses, dragging coal through mean streets to rusty ships. But Julia Lennon's firstborn was destined for a comfortable middle-class home in Walton, a village-like suburb that aligned itself more with Lancashire than Merseyside. After his father, Freddie, a seaman of Irish extraction, vanished when John was 5, domestic complications made it more convenient for the child to grow up in the semi-detached villa of Julia's childless sister, Mary Stanley, who John would always call by his cradle articulation, Mimi. His natural mother, so he was to discover, lived nearby with her second family, and her house would be a bolt hole whenever straight-laced Mimi's parenting methods became oppressive. The innate confusion of who am I to regard as mother affected John's ability to trust adult authority figures whom he mocked and abused as a defense against being rejected by them, particularly after Julia was killed in 1958 by a car driven by an off-duty policeman. Moreover, despite the extenuating circumstances, he felt he'd been rejected by his father and cast out by his mother, having had enough experience of her to know what he was missing. Hence the bitterness inherent in outbursts against teachers, particular friends, and even his devoted Aunt Mimi, who usually blamed doubtful company for John's mischief at Dovedale Primary School, where gabardine raincoated and short-trousered, he began his formal education in September 1946. Lennon was to go beyond petty shoplifting, stealing fruit from local orchards and similar boyhood larks, on gaining a place at Quarry Bank Grammar, nicknamed the Police State, for its draconian affectations and futile rigmarole. Academic streaming was in full force, and so was corporal punishment, administered as often as not with a swish of a bamboo cane on buttocks or outstretched palm. It wasn't long before John was transformed from a capable, if uninvolved pupil to a C-stream hardcase, a known truant, a sharer of smutty stories, and an initiate of a caste who'd graduated from the innocence of tooth-rotting bald sweets to the lung-corroding evil of cigarettes. Not standing when he could lean, the bad attitude of that Lennon boy was reflected too in extracurricular activities that had little bearing on what was supposed to be his education at Quarry Bank. The most relevant of these teenage diversions was John Lennon's acquisition of an acoustic guitar and subsequent membership of the Quarrymen. His innate bossiness ensured a walkover in the power struggle for leadership of this skiffle group, created in the image of that fronted by Lonnie Donegan, who ruled skiffle during its 1957 prime. Though the style was based on blues, hillbilly and further subdivisions of North American folk music, the less purist Quarrymen also embraced rock and roll, and it was this element that impressed a bloke called Paul McCartney when he attended a performance at Walton Summer Fete in 1957. So began one of the most crucial partnerships in pop, and not long after Paul joined the Quarrymen, the younger George Harrison succeeded original lead guitarist Eric Griffiths, who, like most of the other personnel, regarded skiffle as a vocational blind alley, a trivial pursuit to be thrust aside on departure to the world of work, marriage, or national service.
I met a man who went to Glasgow with a bad egg, and nobody would sit with him on the train.
Among the Quarrymen's principal assets were John's gruffly appealing baritone, his instinctive if indelicate crowd control, and the vocal interplay between himself and McCartney. The power structure whereby George was to be subordinate to John and Paul for as long as they stayed together was founded on the handshake that had formalised the Lennon-McCartney songwriting partnership during John's final year at Quarry Bank. Lennon left school in July 1957 with the reputation of a square peg in a round hole, and a kinder testimonial than he may have expected. This enabled him to enroll at Liverpool's Regional College of Art, where before the year was out, John, Paul and George, as well as a turnover of other musicians, were being engaged as a recurring support act at student union dances. By then, every other item in their repertoire was a salaam to Elvis Presley, Gene Vincent, Jerry Lee Lewis, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and further behemoths of classic rock. The only concession to a general craze for traditional jazz was Louis Armstrong's When You're Smiling, albeit with John inserting cheeky references to college staff into its lyrics. Though engagements were few and far between, and often undertaken for as little as a round of fizzy drinks, Lennon's preoccupation with the group took its toll on his studies. What did stereoplastic colour, tactile values, and vorticisms matter when the group were opening that evening for the Merseysippy Jazz Band at Stanley Abattoir Social Club? A lecture-disrupting clown too, Lennon's expulsion seemed inevitable from the start. In preparation for the entrance to class on the very first day, he'd risen early to spend an inordinate amount of time combing his hair into a precarious pompadour, gleaming with brilliantine. For quick adjustments, he stuck a comb in the top pocket of his 3/4-length Teddy Boy drape jacket. Then he walked to the bus stop with a somewhat pigeon-toed gait, owing to trousers so tight that it looked as if his legs had been dipped in ink. His feet adorned with blue suede loafers and fluorescent socks, he stood at the college portals and narrowed his short-sighted eyes. He was too vain to be wearing spectacles. The new student's self-image was at odds with the only subject he kept silent about: his privileged upbringing amidst the mock Tudor colonies, golf clubs and boating lakes of Woolton. An inverted snob, he'd embraced the machismo values of both Teddy Boys and proletarian Merseyside males, and generally came on as the poor honest whacker, a working class hero in fact. By the end of his first term, he was speaking in a raw scouse, laced with incessant swearing. Not peculiar to Lennon alone was the notion that northern women were mere adjuncts to their men. John's overwhelmed girlfriend and future wife, Cynthia Powell, seemed to tolerate this role. As one of an entourage united in terrified admiration, she was lost in his shadow as he lunatized round college in the city centre. One remarkable stunt had George and Paul garbed as vicars, who with John as referee staged a wrestling match in a chain store restaurant until waiters intervened. Few were capable of having a sensible conversation with Lennon. He worked so hard at keeping people amused, he was exhausting, said Rod Murray, a fellow student. One day I saw him running down the street holding a steering wheel. No car, just the wheel. He said he was driving down to town. Back in class, John was impatient of prolonged discussion on art, and it was a veneer of self-confidence rather than any heavily veiled air of learning that swiftly made him a centre of attention. In his defence of Lennon against those at college who wanted him out, course tutor Arthur Ballard insisted that he had some potential aptitude as an illustrator and writer of surreal stories and comic verse. You could see in his work the heritage of Lewis Carroll, reckoned Bill Harry from the graphics department. He also reminded me of Stanley Unwin, his malapropisms, etc., but there was an Englishness about it when everyone else was copying the Americans. The atmosphere of bohemian Liverpool was enough like that of New York's vibrant beatnik district, Greenwich Village, to ensure newshounds from the muck-raking Sunday People were sent up north on a crusade to root out what would be headlined the beatnik horror.